Mr. Pronto, I wanted to follow up on the question of whether you can choose your own topics that you work on.
Yes. So, of course, we just try to tailor projects and assignments based on the interest of the staff members, and we have a lot of colleagues here who have particular backgrounds or particular interests in areas, and we do try to match them. At the same time, we also try to get a new experience, sort of, so they grow in their experience and their work at the UN, and so it is a mixture, but certainly as we work in teams, and it's based on the idea that expressed interest. Some members, staff members, like to work with the International Law Commission, for example, or others like to teach or work on books and so on. So we do try and accommodate to the extent possible, of course. But yes, no, absolutely, and I think this is normal within any position. I mean, there are only so many different types of projects going on at any one time, and of course, if people are very busy, there's a big deadline on something, they might not be able to be working on something else. But yes, in principle, this is we do try and match interest with the project as much as possible, and also there is a on movement now at the UN, on getting a range of experiences, particularly staff at the entry level. And we'll talk about it shortly, about sort of careers and so on. So we do, as managers, try to encourage staff to get as much of a mix of experience. Let me say, just as a final point there, that we're all international lawyers, and in my unit and so one or two of the others, we tend to be more academically oriented. So we do encourage staff to also participate in professional associations, to publish on the side, to keep those sort of intellectual juices flowing, if I can put it that way. And that's also part of that mix, so we can get a healthy mix between sort of administrative, procedural type stuff and also more intellectual things, and which may be projects in the office, or it may be also projects outside of the UN that staff are involved in. It's a big thing for us.
Thank you. Should we transition now to the third part on careers at the UN? I think a lot of our new professionals, interest group members, are looking forward to perhaps working one day with the UN. So we're wondering about what type of candidate.
So thank you, Maria. Unfortunately, our internet today is a bit slow, and it's breaking up. I didn't get all of your questions, but I think I know what it is that you're asking me. Let me say that I know this is the part I'm always on panels, and this is the part that with students and those that are aspiring to work at international organizations like the UN are really interested in. And as a general rule, I really encourage anybody that's interested to do their homework, to really find out about this information. And there is no excuse today, really, with the internet. You can really definite structure in the staffing, and you're looking at working in professional positions, what we call P positions. And at the entry level, that's the P1, P2 positions. And the idea here is what we call the Young Professionals Program. It's an exam process tailored for applicants to work at the United Nations. And that means that really those positions are not open to individuals who are just applying off say, right? So if you're interested in working at the UN, you should really look into the availability of that exam process. Now, the way the rationale there also is that the staffing of the UN Secretariat is based on a distribution that fits the proportion of the budget. It's a bit complicated, but my country, South Africa, based on its contribution to the UN budget, it is entitled to a range of, I think, 20 to 30 South Africans working at the UN. I forget the exact range. And the point is that if South Africans leave the organization, they retire or so on, and the number of South Africans goes lower than that range, or it just looks like it's going lower, they expect that it will go lower because they're anticipated retirements, then it's considered to be an underrepresented country. And so what happens is that the Human Resources Office makes that exam available to nationals from these underrepresented countries, with the idea then that they will boost the representation of those countries. So the first thing you have to find out, and these decisions usually come in the summer, sort of June, July. There's a website somewhere for it. I'm sure it can be Googled quite easily. If you're an aspiring applicant, you need to know, is your country up for it? It may or may not be. So that's the first thing, because if it's not, then the exam is just simply not open to you and on it. So there's a bit of luck that's involved there. The second thing, the sort of a second layer that applies, is that there may be a lot of South Africans working, let's say, in the Office of Legal Affairs. So that in a sense, the spread is such that there's already a lot there. So they will only open the exam, make the exam available for candidates in political affairs or economic affairs and so on. There are different exams, those thematic exams. So you have to be, in a sense, double lucky that both your country is up and also up in the occupational area that you're interested in, the exam that you're particularly interested in. And if that is the case, if you are, then you apply, and there is a convocation process that's done by the Human Resources. They do not take every single person that applies. You can imagine that for some countries that would be in the thousands of people. And so they would take I'm not quite sure how they work this, but it's the first sort of several hundred and so on based on some criteria. And you get convoked, and usually you know that by about November or so in the year. And the exam is the following February, around, more or less. It depends in the area that you're working in. And it's a written exam, several hours, hardcore public international law in the case of the legal exam. And then and if you make it through and you score among the highest, then there is a cutoff that's set. So they take the top so many, and those are then interviewed, go through an interview process. Those that then make it through the interview process and are scored in the highest range, again another cutoff, then those individuals are placed on a roster, and they are made, which is made available then to the various officers that were participated in that exam. And so if we have vacancies at this P1, P2 level, different units have different P type posts, we are required to then look at the people on the roster and to interview and select candidates from that roster, and that's the selection process really at the entry level. The thing that you ought to know is that this is for the UN Secretariat. Different parts of the UN, different programs and sort of different entities, including specialized agencies and so on, have their own processes. They don't all participate in this young professionals program. The other thing before I leave that is that there is a age cutoff that people need to be aware of. It's only individuals younger than a certain age and look at that, because I know it's tough for lawyers. Lawyers tend to study, may spend many years accumulating degrees, and which means that they really, when they graduate, they are close to that age limit. There's something else to keep in mind. Let me say, actually, I forgot to mention that I wanted to make a point about internships and the importance of internships. The UN does have an internship program, in fact, multiple internship programs, in the sense that there's one in New York, there's one in Geneva. The different agencies and entities have their own internship programs. They are subject to, a little bit different. Some are paid, some are not. The ones in the Secretariat are unfortunately not paid, but it's a tremendous experience. I myself was an intern here, and it's a good way to get to know the organization, get to know the officers, get to know what it's like, what the work is like, and also, almost more importantly, good way for people to get to know you, what you are like, or how you work, what are your skills, that you're no longer a CV, a piece of paper with ink on it. You are an individual in the minds of people, and that's very important. So just psychologically, for any job, not only just the UN, but any job. So I would always encourage students to take advantage and be very smart and in the use of their internship opportunities in the summer times and so on. Very strategic in that, because these experiences stay with you for the rest of your life, and they may be a stepping stone towards something. Let me say also that for the UN, internships actually count, that there's a formula, but they count also as work. It's not the same as regular full-time professional work, and this becomes important later on when trying to satisfy work experience requirements. I'll get back to that in a second, but you literally have to count the months. Do you meet the minimum requirement? And internships can contribute towards that calculation. So it has a very practical point. Last point on internships, though, is, if I may say, is that there is a point in time where you have to stop being an intern and move on. I have, through the years, met, if I may put it very bluntly, professional interns. They are people who go from internship to internship to internship. It's great, but at some point, you're no longer an intern. You are now a professional that should be selling your services and be remunerated accordingly, and should pitch yourself at that level. And in fact, the UN's internship program has restrictions on individuals that have graduated in the ability to actually participate in the program, because they're essentially already now professionals and should be pitching, at getting actual contractual work, or applying to be through the staff, to be a staff member, and so on. Now, I mentioned the YPP as entry level. There's some other strategies as well. They are, from time to time, we have a type of contract at the UN called a temporary contract. The idea here is that a staff member goes on leave or takes a secondment somewhere, goes on a temporary contract somewhere else, and these are defined as being under 12 months, and so, or staff member goes on maternity leave or anything like that, and we need to plug that hole essentially for a period of 6 to 9 months, and we will hire through what's called the TJO process, temporary job openings, and these are great because they are paid regular staff contracts. Benefits are a bit less than regular staff, but nonetheless, there are benefits. These things become important as life goes on, but it's a good way to get in and do professional work that counts towards work experience requirements. And the same, people get to know you and who you are, and one thing leads to another, and this experience. These things are important. In a way, it's a strategy to separate yourself from the rest of the crowd that may be looking for positions in work. And so the UN has temporary job openings. There are also other type of contractual arrangements, consultancy arrangements, and so on. The idea there, if it's the way I explain it usually, is if we get someone to come in to say fix our computers, or someone to come in to write a chapter in a book. It's the same idea. There's a pot of money, and you're paid, remunerated, but you're not a staff member. You're not, don't enjoy the benefits of working at the UN and so on. You just do a contractual type work. I would say that I'm a bit hesitant to recommend those type of contractual arrangements, because they're very strict bars between changing streams from a contractual into a staff member. There are requirements taking breaks of at least 6 months and so on, which in effect means almost a year, because you cannot apply for a staff position until those 6 months are over. And so you only start the process of finding a position after 6 months. And so in effect, it's really at least a year bar between doing your contractor type work, what we call SSA, special service agreements, or consultancy agreements, and there are various different types of those, and the ability to become an actual staff member. It's really more suitable for academics that go on sabbatical leave and want to come, get some mixed experience, work at an organization, but with the idea of going back to their tenured positions and things like that, that they're not really concerned about having long-term careers at the UN, things like that. So I'd be a bit hesitant about those contracts, I have to say, at this point in time. The general theme here is that also that the rules change quite often, and they're revised regularly, and so being in touch with the UN Human Resources Office is very important to get their advice on what can or cannot be done, and a lot of this information is on the website. If you don't know it, it's in inspira.un.org, I think it is, but it's just Google Inspira, INSPIRA. That's the portal through which all recruitment is done through the UN, including, by the way, the YPP process, the internships, and so on. And the timelines, you had asked me earlier about timelines. These can be quite long, and the reason for that is that there's a very structured interview process, very structured review process, and also, quite frankly, we get hundreds of applications, and we have to sift through every single one and evaluate and record that evaluation for every single application. And that evaluation gets double checked by, there's a committee that sort of stands behind us and double checks everything. And so that can be quite a lengthy process. That committee is of individuals are doing, scores and scores of job openings. So they may only get to a particular one in a month or two's time. And so we're looking at, from the process, from the time of opening a job opening to a selection being made. So you actually receive the letter congratulating that you have been selected, sometimes 3, 6, 9 months. Depends on first on how many people applied and so on. So that gets built in. I mentioned the internet, and I always joke that the internet's been fantastic. It's a great thing, but it's also a terrible thing. By which I mean it's great because it's very easy to apply to the UN today. Anybody anywhere in the world can apply to the UN. I mean, the information is there, and it's it's a series of clicks and entering your information into what we call a PHP, a personal history profile. It's the UN's resume, and you can save it inside Inspira so that you can just apply to multiple positions. It's relatively easy to do. It's terrible. The internet's terrible because everyone else is doing the same, right? So now you're competing against, and it's quite literally hundreds of people. I mean, it's quite common for us to get hundreds of applications for positions. And I'm talking here about positions at what we call the P3 level and upwards. That's what I forgot to say earlier on, that YPP is at the entry level, restricted to entry level, but at the P3 level upwards, which is now individuals with 4 years of work experience and upwards, it's a regular application like any other, and it's open. That's the deal. It's open to internal staff seeking promotion or lateral movement, as well as to external candidates, and we hire external candidates quite regularly, in fact. And so And so you have to expect that there are several hundred other people applying to that same position that you're applying, and tailor your strategy accordingly. The profile tends to be, lawyers, and a lot of international lawyers, or academics that are international lawyers. My division, because it's more academic oriented, tends to have a lot of academics applying. But there are others. There are others. Like right now, the criminal tribunals are largely winding down the work, which means there's a glut of individuals who are on the market looking for the next step in their careers. So we're seeing, have been for the last several years, a spike in the number of applications of individuals who have a particular type of work experience, being tribunal type work experience in this particular phase that we're going through right now. So it's a range of individuals that apply. What I would say in terms of sort of application strategy now is that think about your comparative advantage. What separates you from the other several hundred that are applying to that position? And I would say first thing is demonstrable interest. I know it sounds weird, but I cannot tell you how many times I've seen applications which are generic, in a sense that they are applications that could be to any office at the United Nations. And in the cover letters, which are very important, the applicant says, they want to work at the UN because they believe in the UN's mission and they want to save the world, essentially. And we all do that as well, and that's fantastic. But they don't say why they want to work in my division. What is it about the particular job that they're interested in, and what skills, particular experience or skills, do they bring to the table that are tailored to my division, to that particular position. And taking that extra effort to tailor the application to the job opening in question already separates you from the crowd. It's a major thing. There are other aspects. I already mentioned that the process is a very rigid one, and the job openings are written very carefully, and there are requirements in there. And what I always suggest is that an applicant take the section on the requirements, the work experience requirements, and so on. Take each sentence and break it out into the individual sentences, and ask yourself, do you satisfy that requirement or not? So if there is let's say a requirement of 4 years work experience, if you don't have 4 years with work experience, seriously consider not applying. It's because there's no way that application sort of can slide in and be accepted. It's just not going to happen, because there's multiple layers of individuals who are checking this, and you have to always keep in mind what I call the harassed officer on the other end, who has to wade through several hundred applications. And are they, their job is to cut to a long list, what we call a long list, of about 50, roughly, approximately, ideally. And so their first job, their task is to cut. If you don't have a requirement, let's say, or a language, sometimes French is a requirement for a particular position. If you don't have that, for cutting you. And so it's probably not a good idea to be in a database somewhere that you have not met a minimum requirement. It's particularly bad if you do make it through. What happens is that those that meet the minimum requirements get put on a long list, and from that long list, a short list is developed of individuals who have the desirables, the experience, or there's certain criteria that is desirable, and those individuals are interviewed. And what is particularly bad is if you reach the interview and it turns out that in the course of the interview that you contradict or say that you actually don't have a particular experience that you said you had, that is grounds for disqualification and can be quite serious in the future. So really, the bottom line here is, be very careful, read those job applications very carefully. The requirements are written very, very carefully. Make sure that you meet them. And if you do, speak to that in the cover letter. If there's particular interest, and here I would say do your homework. I mean, the beauty of the internet is that it's very easy today to find out everything that a particular unit does. And do your homework, talk about it in the cover letter, link your experience to particular projects and so on, because that then makes you a person of interest to that unit that wants to fill a position with someone who is interested in the work and has a particular experience or expertise in the work. That kind of tailoring, taking that time, it's really super important. I cannot tell you how many applications I've received where the candidates haven't even bothered to change the name of the unit that they're applying to. So we get applications saying that they're very happy, excited to work at the drug control office, for example, and that's in Vienna, nothing to do with us. They haven't even bothered to change the name. It's very generic. Those types of applications, we spend very little time on. They're cut immediately, and you wonder whether it was worthwhile, doing that. I wanted to sort of wrap up by talking about just general career strategies. I mean, working at international organizations is a possible career. It's a very viable career. A lot of what I was talking about and have been talking about is not only applicable to the UN. There are many international organizations at this day and age, and they all have legal offices, because in the end, international organizations are legal constructs, and they need lawyers, like they need the financial people to process the contributions from states and so on. They need lawyers to run the organization. Some organizations are to run. What I mean is to provide the legal advice, to deal with all the legal problems that the organization encounters and so on. Some are more tailored than others, by which I mean, if you're going to work at WIPO, the World Intellectual Property Organization, you're likely going to be doing a lot of intellectual property law. But there are some aspects that are more generic, and for example, many organizations have privilege and immunities. Candidates that have some experience, some interest in privilege and immunities will likely, find somewhere a position in an international organization, because these are things that all organizations, or most organizations at least, confront. And there is a UN, what they call the UN Common System. It's an arrangement between a whole big, sort of the broader family of UN entities, where the idea is that you can expect, if you move from one organization to another, you can expect to receive the same benefits. You are part of the same pension plan and so on. And it's geared towards facilitating precisely this type of movement. And so I'm aware of many people, in fact, who have started in one entity and throughout their career moved around to other entities, to other legal offices, and so on in other entities. It's relatively common and encouraged, in fact. So you do an international career, in a sense, in international organizations by pursuing a path that goes around. But my last point is just a general one about the United Nations in particular, about where things are going and about the legal career at the United Nations. And it's increasingly my view that there are two tracks, in a sense. There's the traditional track of lawyers pursuing a legal career at the United Nations. And that is, for example, in the Office of Legal Affairs, or in some of these units that I was referring to, that the UNDP has a little legal office, DPKO, and some others. But you are practicing law. but you're practicing law at an international organization in all the various areas that I've just discussed, and some others that I didn't even get to. But then there is another breed of individual, if I may put it that way. There are many staff working at the UN who have legal training, legal background, but are working in other areas like political affairs, humanitarian affairs. And their legal training is very desirable in the sense that it makes them, the rigidity, the strictness, of the legal training, is an asset in their background that makes them desirable to work in these different areas. But they are no longer practicing law per se. They may be working at an international organization in humanitarian affairs or in political affairs and so on. And as the years go by, let's be honest about it, it's very difficult for them to sort of come back to a legal career and let's go work at a law firm or something like that. It's really a decision that is made that studying law, having that legal training, is just an educational background towards a career at an international organization. And I'm aware of many such individuals. There are quite a few, and who have taken that step. They've, in a sense, decided to leave the legal career and pursue something else, something broader at the UN. And I always encourage students who are starting to think about that, what it is that they want to do, because they are. First of all, there's a perception that it's not easy to get into the UN, and it's true because there's a lot of competition. But what it is that there's no natural paths like regular legal careers. Going to a law firm is the vast majority of law graduates do that. These are sort of a natural path. I don't want to minimize how difficult it is, but that's sort of the stream takes you in that direction. There are no natural paths going into it. You have to sort of go and find it, go and look for it, go and make your own way in. And there are many, I'm seeing it happen all the time, many people being hired at the UN. But in that process, though, some are also considering a different career, which is a career at the United Nations that may involve some legal aspects. So that these individuals working in humanitarian affairs, when a legal issue comes up, they would be the ones to be the interface, for example, or with the Office of Legal Affairs, because they're familiar with the legal concepts and so on. But they would be pursuing essentially a career in humanitarian assistance or career in political affairs and so on. And as I said, as the years go by, it makes it more difficult career-wise to sort of come back and make a choice. And my perspective on all of this is that those positions are growing, in fact. Though for individuals who want to follow that kind of path and want to go see the world, the UN is actually a great place to come, because there are lots of opportunities for those types of aspiring, individuals aspiring for that type of career. And it's something to think about as law as a stepping stone to something else, and which many are taking. I think I will stop there and be quite happy to take questions, assuming that our internet connection is good enough that I can hear your questions.
Well, basically, you answered everything that we had on our list. We can also perhaps candidate looks like. I think you answered that to a certain extent, but if you can elaborate a little bit more, what is a typical candidate that gets into the UN? What are the qualities and what are the skills that they have? Very briefly, if you heard me.
Sure. Yes. Yes, absolutely. I did hear you. Yes. Thank you. It's a great question, because I know a lot of people ask. We're looking for someone who has a global perspective, if I can put it that way, right? An individual who's interested in the values and the ideals of the United Nations, what we're doing. This is a multicultural office. We are literally people from the four corners of the world working here. Individuals are comfortable working in that kind of setting. In the legal office, of course, we're looking at individuals, who have a particular interest and passion for international law, for the international organizations, the work of the UN and others. There really is. It's a very clear, distinct type of individual. Usually they speak many languages, for example, have a very interesting background, having traveled a lot, just have this open perspective to the world, and we recognize that immediately. We all have it, and we see it immediately. I would go one step further and talk about the legal office in that what I mentioned a bit earlier on about demonstrable interest. We see it also in the CV, in the PHP. We see in my division, as we are more academically oriented, we teach, we publish, in candidates who have taught and have published are of interest to us. So there is a section at the back that lists publications and so on. We usually jump straight to that to go and see, what this individual's been working on, where they've taught or not. That makes them they fall within a particular parameter of individual that is of interest to us. And I'm quite sure that other units have their own sort of criteria, things that they're looking at for in terms of type of candidate. And the trick is to try and find that out, either by having bilateral conversations, informational interviews, and this kind of stuff. What is it that the unit is particularly interested in, whether your particular profile suits that or not. But sometimes it's obvious from the actual job opening itself. You get a sense of what it is, that the type of individual that they're looking at, and you speak to that experience. If possible, bring it out in the cover letter. Successful applications, or really interesting applications, have been ones where the candidates have not only indicated their interest, but they've actually pointed to particular things that they've done in the past that is of relevance to our division. Right? So we work with the International Law Commission, and there are many students out there and so on who have written things about the International Law Commission, or interned with a commission member, or even went and attended some of the meetings, and they make the point. They draw that connection and they make it out in the cover letter. At the very least, it makes it very difficult for us to cut them and say, "Oh, they're not interested." And sometimes I explain it that way, as to make it difficult for the selector to cut you. It's almost the way to think about it, and put that. As I said, think what is your comparative advantage forward. But that global perspective is what I'm looking at. Languages, I get asked often, is it a requirement that you speak multiple UN languages? The answer is no, actually. Depends on the position. Some yes, some no. The job opening will tell you. But I was once on a career panel where the person who spoke after me said, don't bother learning another language. English is all you need to know, because the world today functions in English. And I was shocked, actually. I was quite stunned by what it said. People who have the fact of knowing different languages, even if it's not a requirement, but it is evidence of this global perspective that I'm talking about, of interest in other cultures, in receptiveness to other ideas and so on. And so that is what knowing multiple languages, that's the signal it sends us, even if it's not a requirement. And having said so, there are many very successful candidates who only know one language. We get that messaging from something else, right? Not necessarily from the language, but that's what we're looking for. Is that